morning, and welcome to Morning Movie News, where, wow, it was a really busy weekend, at least when it comes to Hollywood. So many headlines debuted. In fact, I had to actually hold some for tomorrow, but here are the biggest ones. And then for the viewer question, I'm going to talk about the Nina Simone controversy, both my thoughts on it because so many of you asked me to do so, which is why it's going in the viewer question slot, but also why it took me a couple of days to cover it. I just want to clarify that. So first off, let's talk about Joseph Gordon Levitt. These are actually in no particular order in terms of importance, and I'd actually be curious to know which you think are the biggest headlines. But anyway, Joseph Gordon Levitt has left the Sandman film. It was a big deal when he was initially signed on. He was going to produce, he was going to star, so many rumors. He said he wasn't sure what he was going to do, and they had in fact just recently attached a writer to the project. So it was pretty surprising that he took to Facebook to personally quit the project, very publicly, and with a real heart-to-heart to fans. And he basically said, and I thought it was interesting that he was like, for those of you who follow this kind of stuff, and it's like, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, anyone who's on your Facebook page follows this kind of stuff. So anyway, and also, why are you on Facebook and not tweeting these things? But anyway, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, he put a long note out there, and he basically boiled it down to creative differences. And it reminded me a lot of Ava DuVernay leaving Black Panther, being like, wow, the perfect person for this project left. Oh no! But Black Panther turned out great with Ryan Coogler, so we don't have to worry about that. And I'm sure, hopefully, that Sandman will find. I'm not quite sure because here's what I picked up out of what Joseph Gordon-Levitt wrote. It wasn't, I think, just creative differences, but he was very, very clear, I guess you could say, in what his grievance was and how it occurred. And basically, he said, when I first signed on to do this project, I was very excited to make Sandman with Warner Brothers. He has a very good relationship with Warner Brothers. He was in Inception. He was in The Dark Knight Rises. He had a good relationship with them, largely through Christopher Nolan. But then he said, I was unaware that Sandman was actually going to go over, or, it was, did not know this was the plan, but it actually went over to New Line, which is a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. And basically, even though it's owned by Warner Brothers, it has its own management. And New Line is much more, of a B-movie picture house, right? They're not going to try and put out the prestige pictures that Warner Brothers does, for instance. So I think that's where the problem came about. I think that Joseph Gordon-Levitt probably wanted to make a Sandman that was incredibly faithful to the original material and very artistic. Joseph Gordon-Levitt definitely has that artistic side. Does it get him into a little bit of trouble, with his career? I think so, because Joseph Gordon-Levitt is box office poison. Occasionally he will find himself in a hit, but his lead films really don't do particularly well. And, if you cast Joseph Gordon-Levitt as a lead in your movie, don't expect anyone to see it, which is unfortunate, because he's very talented. And also, I got the chance to interview him on the red carpet for Premium Rush, actually, which nobody saw, and he was just absolutely a wonderful human being. So nice. But anyway, although I'm sure Warner Brothers and New Line do not appreciate this. But anyway, New Line is the kind of company that's going to be very concerned with how the film does at the box office. Ooh, I guess because New Line's like, we're not the kind of place that wins awards, right? We make movies that make money. So I think that New Line is like, although I do believe that they, I forget who off the top of my head was in charge of the Lord of the Rings franchise now that I think about it. But anyway, I don't think they, obviously they don't feel that Sandman is going to be their new Lord of the Rings for the studio or for New Line or whatever, or Joseph Gordon-Levitt wouldn't have left. I suspect that they want to make it, more like the video game adaptations. They're like, let's change it a little bit, let's tweak it to make it more mainstream friendly to newbies, and let's try and commercialize it a little bit, which I'm sure horrified Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And this is the conversation that all creative people have with the studio suits for every single movie. Trust me. The studio wants to make money. The creative person, the director, and the writer often are like, well, I want to make something that is a work of art, right? I mean, that's often the push and pull of Hollywood. However, it's a good system that's been set up, and what happens is that you often end up with something smack in the middle where everybody's happy. That's the ideal scenario. For instance, if you look at the Wachowskis, when they're let to do too much what they want, it's a disaster, right? They need a business person saying, you know what? I think this is a mistake. I think you've gone too far. Let's dial it back a little bit and make it a little more accessible. And I think a number of Wachowski films Probably would have been better if they had had someone, one of the suits, interestingly enough, at Warner Brothers, stand up to them and say, no. And so I think that's that's a good relationship. I think often I've seen the comments and in other, when people are discussing Hollywood, they often vilify the suits. But when the suits do their job, it's a very good relationship. For instance, also George Miller, we've talked about. The suits in Hollywood should have been like, again, at Warner Brothers. You can't spend this much money on the movie, George, because we're never going to turn a profit, and you're never going to get a sequel greenlit, especially if it's rated R. So something's got to go. You got either this PG-13, or you got to bring the budget down, like Deadpool, right? We'll be talking about Deadpool later on in this video, because it's inspired another movie. But anyway, I'm just curious to what you think of Joseph Gordon. I guess at the end of the day, what I'm saying is I think Joseph Gordon Levitt should have written it out. Sandman's a good property. It's a good fit with him. What else is he going to do, for heaven's sakes? I mean, his career is like, medium. And I think that, Francis Ford Coppola, I've told this story before, infamously, when the studio said they wanted to cast Robert Redford as Michael Corleone, he went into like an epileptic fit in the conference room. And they were like, wow, he really doesn't want to cast Robert Redford. I guess we'll go with this new guy, Al Pacino. So I just feel, you have to, and this is, I think, a good lesson, often the person who leaves is the person who suffers, right? Because they might end up making the Sandman movie. It'll be fantastic, and everyone who stuck around and the new people who came on board will benefit. Look at Black Panther. Black Panther's going to be fine. And Ava DuVernay, well, she turned out okay as well. She's not going to be associated with that property. And of course, infamously, Edgar Wright. Ant-Man turned out great with Peyton Reed at the helm, no less. And now they're going to make a sequel. And what's Edgar Wright doing? He's trying to sell distribution rights to his upcoming movie Baby Driver, and it's like it's struggling. So I mean, I think when you have a lot of stuff on the line, there are going to be a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and I think really successful people who operate at the upper levels of Hollywood just know how to navigate those situations, and you just have to figure it out. You gotta, as they said in Jerry Maguire, you gotta ride it's a quote, so don't get upset with me. You gotta ride that ass like Zorro, make it work. So Jerry Maguire, excellent movie. Back when Cameron Crowe made good movies. All right, so let's go to the second story of the day, which seems like a horrible idea. I just got done talking about how you have to trust the suits, but I don't know who came up with this. Although I have to say, Phil Lord and Chris Miller are producing this. They, of course, did the Lego Movie, the Jump Street movies. I have tremendous faith in them. And I'm sure Sony does as well at this point. So maybe they came up with this idea, and that's why they're moving forward with it. But they're doing a Men in Black Jump Street crossover. Like, this is actually happening. Like, it came out with the leak. It was revealed that they were planning this. And it's true. It's not like a joke or like something people were fooling around with or like just a studio brain fart. It's like an actual thing. And it's such an actual thing that they've just hired a director, James Bobbin, who is coming off of not only Flight of the Conchords and the Muppets movie, Muppets Most. I think he did. I think he directed the first Muppets movie, maybe both. Now that I think about it, but James Bobbin, and then of course he's doing the new Alice in Wonderland movie, which I don't know how well that's going to do, but he looks like he's doing a very good job with it. From what I can tell from the trailers, it looks like James Bobbin is certainly growing as a director. Now, they're not going to have Will Smith, and they're not going to have Tommy Lee Jones. So I'm kind of not having a hard time understanding what on earth you would want in the Men in Black franchise, right? Like, what's left? I mean, I think the Men in Suits is cool, right? That's kind of cool. But I think that franchise has been very star-dependent the whole time that it's been around. And also, I just don't understand why you need to put the Jump Street characters in there. Maybe Jump Street will go and they'll go and get upgraded from the division they've been working in for the first two movies, because Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum are both coming back. Perhaps they will go and start working at Men in Black, and they will be the Men in Black. That might be the crossover, perhaps. But then why not just make a Men in Black movie with Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum? Perhaps they feel like the vibe is there, and so they might as well acknowledge it. I don't know. I have tremendous faith again in Phil Lord and Chris Miller. I guess this is a good idea, but they're not doing a particularly good job selling it at the moment. So I'm curious, are you at all interested in this type of crossover? And do you think that the Men in Black brand means anything without Will Smith or Tommy Lee Jones? Or Josh Brolin, who replaced Tommy Lee Jones in the Men in Black 3, and I think did a pretty good approximation of Tommy Lee Jones. I really do feel it's Will Smith's franchise, so we'll see. All right, so that's the second story of the day. And I'd be curious also how audiences would react, because audiences are, I think, understandably sensitive these days, but also extremely aggressive, as we're seeing again with the Ghostbusters trailer and Gods of Egypt. If they were to take the Men in Black characters and not replace Will Smith with another, black actor, right? I mean, to take that role away, I don't know how people would react. Let's see. All right, so let's go to the third story of the day, where Deadpool has affected yet another movie franchise. This is the Spider-Man franchise over at Sony, and now they are aggressively pursuing the Venom movie once again. A movie which, interestingly, by the way, the Deadpool writers at one point did work on. Now, it's going to be independent from the Spider-Man movies. Now, of course, Venom was introduced as the alien symbiote who took over Spider-Man, right? Gave him his famous black suit, and was actually, covered in Spider-Man 3 with an absolutely horrible performance by Topher Grace. I mean, I don't think anybody has ever been able to get out of their head that horrible scene where he had his teeth knocked out and he had those strands of black goo on him, and you're just like, what's happening? How did you make Venom not cool? But anyway, they want to make a Venom solo movie that will eventually, hopefully, become its own franchise. And I think the reason they don't want it to be tied into the Spider-Man universe, although I don't know how they're going to do that, considering the fact he dons a look like similar to Spider-Man, although I do have an idea in just a moment. I think they want to make it R-rated, and so they want to have it be its own entity, because Venom, of course, is an incredibly violent character, and they want to be able to show that in all its glorious gore. And I can see a Venom movie maybe doing well if you kind of make an action horror movie, right? Now, the direction I would go in is the Flash Thompson direction that they recently did in the comics, where this alien symbiote is used by the government to take Flash, who was a double amputee from fighting with the military, and giving him legs and having him, that's why he would agree to do this, because it can put him back in combat and make him mobile again and feel like, he can contribute again. And so I think that's a pretty, it's kind of like a little bit like the Oracle storyline with Barbara Gordon. So you basically have one of those typical, like, this guy is a double amputee, and he takes an assignment with the government, but to serve his country, he must bond himself with an evil alien symbiote that it's hard for him to psychically control and could turn him into a homicidal monster. I mean, that sounds like a pretty good pitch to me. I like that, and I think that, Venom is actually one of the best approximations I've seen to the Deadpool brand that's been suggested, and so I think that could indeed succeed. And I think it could be a really great role for someone in that Flash Thompson as the Flash Thompson character, because they would get a lot of screen time too, and also some really cool visual effects. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. Now, when it comes to the Nina Simone situation, the trailer came out last week, and it got a lot of attention. And I had a number of people write to me and say, you've got to talk about the Nina Simone controversy. And so I was like, well, the reason I waited was twofold. One, I wanted to look into it and make sure I understood it's a very delicate situation. And two, I think, I care very much about representation in Hollywood. I feel very strongly that entertainment should reflect the audience that consumes it. And I think that Hollywood is, making a lot of, progress in that area. However, there are some people who are very upset about that. Very, very difficult. So I want to be respectful of that as well. Just like I talked about Chris Rock hosting the Oscars, you don't want to do this stuff, you don't want to push it 24/7, because it lessens the argument, people get tired of hearing it, and also there's a lot of good things to discuss in Hollywood. We don't want to constantly be lecturing Hollywood. So I try to pace myself and, pick different days to pick different subjects, and also to take a little bit of a breather sometimes. And that's why another one of the reasons I waited to comment on the Nina Simone controversy. However, please do understand, I take all of this very seriously. I think it's very important to talk about it, and I think it's important to be very honest about it. So thank you for everyone who asked me to cover this, and thank you for your patience in my getting to it. And I just wanted you to know that the delay came from a good and constructive place. But I will never stop covering stories like this or paying attention to them, because I believe they are important. All right, so what's going on? Well, Zoe Saldana is playing Nina Simone in one of these typical tiny little movies, right? Made by a little tiny studio that nobody's ever heard of. It has David Oyelowo co-starring with her, and basically it's one of those biographies about a famous person where they just focus on like one tiny little chapter in their life, usually late in their life, so they can reflect back on what they accomplished before, and you're supposed to get an idea for that person, their whole life and who they were, through this small little, angle, perspective. So basically, this is when she was later in her life, battling a lot of demons, the trailer sets up, meets this guy in the hospital where she's being treated for, alcoholism, etc. and he becomes her personal assistant, and just the kind of relationship that they have, and that he saves her, etc., etc. Very Hollywood story. Why are people upset about this? Well, Zoe Saldana, of course, is not particularly dark-skinned. And I believe she's, I think actually of mixed race, and I think is very much associated with the Latino community, actually. So a lot of people were very upset to see Zoe Saldana not only play this woman who was a very big civil rights activist in her day, who's much darker skinned than Zoe Saldana, not only be played by Zoe Saldana, but for Zoe Saldana to put on a prosthetic nose and darken her skin to play the role. Now, I would think that would make Zoe Saldana right there realize this was a really bad idea, right? Like, if Zoe Saldana can't play the role as is, she shouldn't be playing it. I think as people have said, for her to basically put on blackface, I think is really inappropriate. Now, also, I don't understand why the producers would do that, because Zoe Saldana is not a box office draw. Zoe Saldana is not a highly regarded actress. So I don't know what she brings to the table, except some name recognition, but largely only through Guardians of the Galaxy. And even there, I don't think anybody really goes to see Guardians of the Galaxy for Zoe Saldana. I think a lot of people left the movie liking Gamora, but I don't think it turned anyone into a Zoe Saldana fan. Now, I'm sure some of you it did, but for the most part, no one was like, what's Zoe Saldana doing next, right? By evidence, the fact that this came out of nowhere. So I don't even understand why they made such a big effort to cast Zoe Saldana instead of getting someone who was appropriate for the role. Now, the Nina Simone estate has also been very upset about this. And they have been taken to Twitter, and they have said to Zoe Saldana, we don't want you ever saying the Nina Simone name again. This is really disrespectful to this woman that we, of course, are trying to protect her legacy, and we do not condone this film at all. So this film's basically DOA, right? So the situation, though, is I wanted to get the perspective, because obviously I'm going to look at this differently from people in the Black community. So I read a really interesting article in the Huffington Post from T. Better Baldwin. And I think he really spoke to something that was important. And he said, once again, this is a situation where dark-skinned, women are not considered ideal, to the point where they can't even play themselves. Like, there are so many actresses who would be appropriate to play Nina Simone, but yet here it goes to a light-skinned actress, Zoe Saldana. And so I think that's one of the reasons that people are so pushing for Lupita Nyong'o to succeed in Hollywood, and why they're so disappointed that she pretty much so far has only been cast in voiceover roles, right? Like, why don't you want to see Lupita Nyong'o? Because there's really not a lot of instances of dark-skinned actresses being portrayed as attractive. And I think, Viola Davis, I think, is breaking down a lot of barriers, but still, it's a difficult situation where the lighter the skin, the better it's considered, which is, I think, really unfortunate, and it creates a lot of, beauty image issues or body image issues for a lot of, Black women, which is, I think, absolutely horrible. For instance, recently I was reading, I've been following the election, like everybody, and in some kind of video talking about Trump, someone, a Trump supporter, for just basically no reason, decided to say, another reason that I want to see Trump be president is that it's about time that we had an attractive first lady again after, 8 years of Michelle. And it's like, that was like an unnecessary shot, particularly because I think Michelle Obama is beautiful and so elegant. And I would say up there with Jackie Kennedy as a really wonderful first lady who I think projects a beautiful image as someone who is both beautiful but intelligent and very, gets stuff done and very proactive. Just really like a wonderful role model to women everywhere. And I think one of the nicest things about Michelle Obama is that she does have dark skin, and that she still is considered absolutely gorgeous. So the fact that anybody, and she is gorgeous, so the fact that anybody would say that she isn't, I feel really, betrays really negative viewpoint towards women of darker skin. And this is something that needs to change. So I can understand the upset, not only that Zoe Saldana was cast and they felt that, let's get this actress to play this role. She took a role away from a Black actress of darker skin when there are almost no opportunities for that demographic in Hollywood. Very difficult. So I think that it is a very difficult situation. And I think that this is like another situation where Hollywood is like, I don't understand the casting. And this one is particularly weird to me. It's a little bit like Exodus, Gods and Kings, where, Ridley Scott was like, how am I going to make a huge movie with actors that nobody's heard of? He was very... disdainful, saying Muhammad so-and-so from some such place. And it's like, what? But everybody was like, but Joel Edgerton is your box office draw? And here I would say the same thing. This controversy has come from nowhere because Zoe Saldana, is not someone who I think would be ideal casting for any producer. All I can guess is that maybe Zoe Saldana really wanted this role and was active in, getting the movie made and campaign. And she was very aggressive and went after it to try and maybe make herself a more important actress. But it certainly backfired. And I think when she was sitting in that makeup chair, as T. Better Baldwin for the HuffPo said, she should have realized when they were making her skin darker and putting a prosthetic nose on her face that this was a really bad idea. And I think Zoe Saldana would have been better off producing the film and giving an opportunity to an actress who looked more like Nina Simone. And also, for heaven's sakes, contacting the Nina Simone estate and squaring that support away. How do you make a movie about Nina Simone and not be in contact with the estate? It is like movie making 101. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and that viewer request for the Nina Simone story. And then, of course, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.